Hi everyone, and welcome to our first WildCare Happy Hour with the Center for Conservation in Peru. Thank you for waiting. We're gonna go ahead and get started today. And I hope you all have your STL Zoo beer ready to go to enjoy our lovely conversation this evening. So to get started, my name is Emily, and I will be your moderator today. I am a conservation education liaison at the St. Louis Zoo. Joining me as panelists are Amanda Burr, the zoological manager of birds, Mel Miller, a bird keeper, Clinton Skaggs, another bird keeper, and Sydney Oliveira, the other zoological manager of birds. So you might sense a theme happening today. So today we're going to talk about the Center for Conservation in Peru, some of the things that all of the lovely panelists have done there, and a little bit of the background of the center. So it is a super amazing place where one of the driest deserts on Earth hits one of the coldest ocean currents, and cold currents are very nutrient rich. So actually after you go off the coast, it becomes a biodiversity hotspot. And it's also where over half of the population of Humboldt penguins live today. So you can find all sorts of seabirds there, different types of pinnipeds, and they all enjoy all the bounty of fish and squid that live just off of the coast there in Peru. So the goal of the center in Punta San Juan, Peru, is to secure the future of the threatened Humboldt penguin in Punta San Juan and all the other animals that live there. So today we're going to talk a lot about how we are accomplishing that. So I wanted to give you a little bit of background information on why this place in particular is so important and why we are working so hard to restore the habitat there. So in the 1830s, believe it or not, just right in the middle of the Industrial Revolution, we started having all these machines that could produce crops at an amazing rate. And what happened was we used up all the nutrients in the soil, and believe it or not, Western science had absolutely no idea how plants grew. Even in the 1830s, they were kind of aware they might need water, but having proper nutrients in the soil was just still something that they sort of were getting, but it was evading them. So there were explorers that had gone to Peru and seen that the Incas were putting seabird guano out on their crops, and they were growing amazingly. So people in England and over in Europe were using things like sawdust and feathers and wool rags, just anything they could find. And you know, some of the things they were using kind of worked, but coming over and getting this seabird guano from the Pacific Islands and from the coast of Peru, it was a miracle. It was white gold. It's so high in nitrogen and other things that it made the plants grow again, and the plants were once again high yielding. They also figured out that you could use it for gunpowder, you could use it for clothing dye. So this guano suddenly became hugely in demand. And what happened was centuries of guano that were just hundreds of feet deep were mined in about 30 years, mining many different islands completely bare of that guano. And there was actually one of our first in the US imperial moves, if you will, William Seward put through an act of Congress called the Guano Islands Act that said if we found a guano island and nobody had clearly claimed it, we could just take it for our own. And we sure did. We really did. So that's another fun thing you can look up later. But what ended up happening is it really negatively affected the Humboldt penguin population, because they're actually not the ones creating all of that guano necessarily. They're the ones that were using it for their nests. So it's nice and soft. It's a place where they can dig a little hole and create a nest. And there wasn't any guano left. So that became a huge problem. The other issue is that people still do use the guano. So to this day, it is still one of the best natural fertilizers you can find on the planet. And today, it mostly goes to the people of Peru so that they can grow certified organic crops to then sell and make a living. So the guano is still needed by people. It's still needed by the birds. And one of the things that the Center for Peru does is make sure that everybody has what they need. So the Punta San Juan created a consortium that includes the St. Louis Zoo, the Chicago Zoological Society, the Kansas City Zoo, and the Woodland Park Zoo. And we do have a Peruvian member, the Cayetano Heredia University Center for Environmental Sustainability. And the Center for Conservation in Peru has a few primary conservation objectives. The first one is monitoring Humboldt penguin population dynamics via periodic censusing, and so Amanda's going to talk about that today. Conducting health assessments and collecting biological data on penguin populations and other native fauna. So Mel will be talking about her experience with that today. Of course, supporting sustainable guano harvest to protect the most productive breeding areas in Punta San Juan especially. Clinton will tell you all about that. Also developing an in-country distance learning program for students in Peru and other parts of the world to be able to learn and see all about this amazing spot on Earth. Now, we aren't going to talk about that today. I was the one that did go help put in distance learning equipment. It's not really worth a 5-minute chat. We went down, it took about a week to set it up. It's up and running and it's amazing, incredible experience. But it was a week in an office building. So check mark, that is done. And then Sydney's gonna talk a lot about facilitating the management of the Punta San Juan Reserve as a marine protected area. So just having upkeep and making sure everything is running and the long-term health assessments and things as well. So we'll go ahead and get started with Amanda and the Humboldt Penguin Census.
Well, thank you, Emily. And again, I'm Amanda Burr. I'm a ZM in the Bird Department, and I'll tell you a little bit about the Humboldt Penguin Census, why it's important, what the process looks like, and generally kind of what we found. So here's a photo of myself and one of the Guano Islands that we will circle to census the Humboldt penguins off the coast of Peru. Go ahead, Emily. Okay, so here's a map of Peru. You can see that I've kind of highlighted in red several of the sites that we will visit. So we start in Lima and we work our way south. So we do the southern chunk of Peru. And what we're doing is we're visiting historic molting sites of the Humboldt penguins. We are careful to always go to the same sites year after year so we can see trends. And it's important to catch the birds while they're molting because during that period of time, they'll all kind of group together on land and they're not going out into the ocean to hunt. So as we come and we approach on small boats, we can see the groups of penguins with binoculars and we can count them. So we're not only counting just pure numbers of the penguins, but we're also keeping track of how many adults are there, how many juveniles are there, how many chicks we might actually see. And we're also keeping track of their molting progress, like what stage are they in their molt? Are they at the start of their molt or are they at the end of their molt? So we begin in Lima, Peru, and then we move south. And along the way, we will meet up with kind of 3 core teams that help us throughout at different steps. We have different partners from governmental organizations like CERNAP and CERFOR that help oversee protection of the Guano Islands and natural areas in Peru. They also are helping us to get the permitting required to go around those protected Guano Islands. We're also meeting up with Acarema, which is a non-for-profit marine conservation ecosystem education organization. So those different teams are helping us throughout the way. We're also meeting up with the staff from Punta San Juan, and they will help us drive for the last leg of the journey, all the way south to the very tip of Peru. So these are just a few images to show you kind of what it looks like. So we're physically getting into small fishing boats, and we're circling these guano islands. So you can see the photo on your left-hand side, there's a small group of penguins there. So the group is physically counting them through binoculars. We'll write it down in our books and see what number we came up with. We'll try to get a consensus within the group within about 10% of the counts. With this group, it's pretty small. You could probably count those penguins pretty easily. Sometimes it's very challenging and you're moving around in a boat and looking through binoculars. So we always try to make sure our data is as accurate as possible and kind of reach a consensus within the team that's on the boat with us that day. On the right-hand side, you can see an example of what our field notes might look like when recording the molt. So these are all molt scores that one person will be recording the molt scores and one person will be looking through the binoculars and reading them off as they're looking at the penguins. So that's just an example of what the field notebook might look like. You can go on to the next slide. So there have been a few new technologies which help to make our censusing easier, help to make the counting easier. As you can see in the photo on the left, sometimes the penguins may be stacked in really tightly with cormorants and other birds. So sometimes drones have been helpful to kind of get a more bird's eye view of the groups of penguins, which really helps. I have a couple short clips, if Emily, you want to play those, just to kind of give you an idea of what we're dealing with on the boats. So there's a small group of penguins down there in the center, but surrounding them is all guano cormorants. So they can be kind of hard to pick out when you're in a moving boat, but there they are right in the middle. And then the next clip is just a clip of us utilizing a drone at one of the sites on the boat, which presents its own challenges as well. But generally, what we have found typically is that penguin populations are really sensitive year to year to a few big things, big weather events like El Niños that will warm the water, can have big impacts on penguin populations year to year. As the water gets warmer, that means that there are less fish available to them as the fish are moving down and out to cooler waters. So that can be really impactful on populations, as well as human disturbance, which Emily had kind of alluded to. That's why guano harvesting in a sustainable and managed way is really, really important to the Humboldt penguins, because they're very skittish and they will abandon breeding sites or molting sites if disturbed. So, so that's just a really quick snapshot of what the Humboldt penguin census looks like. And I will turn it over to the next person. Thank you very much.
I guess that's me. Hi, everyone. I can't see myself. This is my first webinar where I'm a presenter, so just be kind to me, please. When I was asked to do this, it was kind of, wow, what would little Missy Miller from 40 years ago say? She's going to go to Peru and see penguins. And Missy would have said, where's Peru? But we started, and I got to had the very privileged opportunity to go to Peru and help with this health assessment, and why, and you can read that as well as I can tell you. And it was nice because there were already areas at Punta San Juan that had people there, so we could kind of add on to what they had. Now with what we wanted to kind of, Amanda alluded to keeping the baseline on what the how many penguins there are, and then now we can establish the baseline for their health and their disease problems that they may or may not have, and then follow those variations throughout the course of the years. This has been going on for decades. The zoo has first helped in 2007, and we had 4 people go. So we are very involved in the health assessment, but also the census and the guano harvest, and just helping our area down there. Okay, thanks. Next. Wow, well, I'm doing a health assessment, so we're loading up the truck and we're moving to Beverly because there's a lot of lab work and lab equipment that we had to take down. And then sitting in a truck for ever how long, it takes about 7 hours to get from Lima, Peru down to Punta San Juan. And I had to deal with all fumes, and having heard Amanda talk about the boat, I'll take fumes anytime, because I would have been puking over the boat. So you're a better person than I am, Amanda, that's for sure. All right. So it's, like I said, it's a long drive, and just so you're aware, you might be interested in what we saw along the way. And it can be bleak industrial 1 minute, and then an hour later, wow, you come around the corner in the mountain road, and this is what you find. So the 7 hours were definitely worth it. There were some hard, fumy times, but then in and out the mountain roads, and then you get to see this. So it was pretty fabulous. I mean, I still think, oh, what would Missy say? And here she is watching, seeing Peruvian mountains. It's crazy. All righty. Oh my gosh, and we finally made it. So to get there and to see all that, and you don't know what to expect. You just don't know. It was amazing. And you see all that, and you can hear the surf, and you can smell all that guano that Emily has talked about. Just every sense, the sight of it, it was just incredible. I still can't believe I got to do it. It's really something. I hope I don't start crying. All righty, let's get to the nuts and bolts of it. So here we are. First of all, there's the terrain, and I'm sitting on a field of poop, and there was a lot of that and a lot of trekking through that. On the other one, there we are carrying a whole lab. So we have all of our collecting equipment and storage, and when we're getting ready to do all this, so we're climbing through all the terrain, the rocks, and it was just the greatest hikes over the days I was there. It was cool. It was hard because we're carrying all that stuff, but just to get to do that I'm still okay. So next, so yay, I'm holding a penguin. So Marco and the site on the at Punta San Juan, the team members did all the scouting of the nesting sites. So we knew ahead of time where we were going. We just followed Marco and his team. So you see those little burrows and the little penguins peeking out. So Marco and his team did the main extracting from those burrows, and you see I'm holding a penguin, and holding a penguin in Peru is much different than holding a penguin in the safe confines of the St. Louis Zoo, where I know if anything happens that I have quick medical attention. Marco was very patient, and obviously he helped me out a lot. So there I am holding a penguin on poopy soil. All right, sorry. So, wow. That's Mike Atkinson. He had been a veterinarian at the St. Louis Zoo, and now he's in Chicago and has been the lead in this health assessment pretty much from the get-go. So you can see all the things we did, and these penguins probably felt like we were aliens coming out, because we poked, prodded, pulled feathers, just, put these little tags on their feet, which were very small. It was pretty much just like getting your ear pierced just in the webbing of their feet. And, we had to go in all these separate bags, and there was a lot going on. And, but still, it's okay. You can kind of see in the back, that's just one of the many satchels that we carried around. All righty, next. Okay, I have to show you, seeing a penguin being weighed. it's kind of funny, and they just kind of resign themselves to, okay, let's just get this done. And so there it is. And then what you see there is, you know, when you get out there, and we processed about 60, this was 10 years ago, folks, so bear with me with the numbers. I didn't take that great of notes. There's a division of labor to make it more streamlined. And so I held one penguin just so I could take a picture and say, yay, did it. But I thought, okay, I have legible handwriting. I can pay attention to everything that's going on, because usually we were processing 2 penguins at once. And so that's what I did. And because that's what needed to be done. And we all were as important as the next. Mine just happened to be a little more subdued. But again, I got to see a penguin hanging from a little scale, and we could get all this done in less than 5 minutes. It was like a pit stop in a car race, and we got them right back safely in their burrows if they may have had chicks. So we just got everybody put back together as soon as we could. And we got pretty good at it by the end of it. Then of course, after you collect samples from 60 penguins, you've got to do the next thing. Slide. And this is our little lab. And you see it's Wendy, a vet student, Peruvian vet student, and I. And that's what we did every evening after we were in the field. We came back. We were able to get a shower, thankfully. And then we spent the next 4 hours separating them all, labeling all of them. It was tedious and labor intensive, but again, really needed to be done. And then there's those poor schmucks looking in the microscopes, and they wanted to do some preliminary assessments of blood counts and everything. And so they were over there with these little clickers and going through the grid. And I'm, well, boy, did I get the good job. And then I think of Amanda being in that boat, having to, you know, she's going like this, looking at binoculars and clicking the penguins. Man, I got the best deal. That's all there was to it. And there we are. It takes a team, and there's Marco, and we're in our little matching WildCare shirts. And there's our team with our celebratory dinner that I think everyone has to have at the end of their time. And that's it. Thanks, guys.
All right, I think I'm up next. So my name is Clinton, and I'm a keeper in the bird department at the St. Louis Zoo. And my experience was from the 2019 guano harvest. So as we've already mentioned, guano is just a fancy word for bird droppings. And while you might think I got the quote unquote crap job, I actually got to do the guano harvest, which I will describe, as well as some census work and some animal health assessments too. And I got to ride down from Lima to Punta San Juan in a luxury bus as well, so no fumes or anything there. So I think my trip has been pretty well in comparison. So my Punta San Juan guano harvest occurred last July into August, and it's actually a couple month long situation, and we go down in shifts. So myself, as well as another keeper from Sea Lion Sound, went down from July into August, and then 2 other keepers continued on with our work from early August into mid-August. And I'm just going to describe a little bit about why we're doing the sustainable guano harvest and some of the things that happen for that. So you might be asking, like, what's the deal with the poop? Like, what's the deal with us monitoring this guano? Well, as Emily mentioned earlier, the guano was being harvested in a non-sustainable manner for all sorts of things decades and decades ago. And for the health of the birds, we obviously wanted to monitor this because the Humboldt penguins rely heavily upon the guano being produced. And I actually got to talking to Emily before this presentation, and I was under the assumption that the Humboldt penguins were the ones producing the guano that is being harvested. And while their urates and poop do contribute to that, it's mostly other birds, especially the guaneye cormorant, who are nesting in these areas by the hundreds of thousands and producing these deposits of nice guano that can be used for fertilizer. So I was under the common misconception, even being the penguin keeper, that the penguins are actually using the guano just like we are. But if we go about it in an unsustainable manner, we're going to contribute to the decline of the species that live around there and a domino effect. We actually, a little bit of history with this sustainability portion of it. As Emily mentioned earlier, it was being just taken by anybody and everybody that could get their hands on it, including the Incas, who were the original people in Peru. So there is actually a government-sanctioned entity, the Suriname, as Amanda mentioned earlier, that is on site in Punta San Juan, always regulating the birds coming in and out, and even the other wildlife coming in and out, as well as the people. So nobody gets in or out of Punta San Juan without having clearance first. And they've actually built a wall. It's sort of like a peninsula. So they've actually built a wall around 3 sides of it, and then the other side is ocean that can be monitored from the reserve itself. So there is a government entity that has taken over as sustainable, as overseeing the sustainable harvests, and we get clearance from those guys to go in and help out. And they've got this plan. It's actually really, really cool. They've got this plan of the areas that they're going to touch. And the guano harvests happen about every 5 to 7 years. There was one in 2001. There was one in 2007, another in 2012, and then one in 2019 that I was a part of. And so that gives time for the guano to actually build up in these areas that they're going to plan out and actually plan to excavate. And I thought it was really, really cool because we're there to sort of monitor if the guaneros, or the guys harvesting the guano, are actually interfering with the birds directly. We're there to sort of educate them and let them know how the birds are going to behave, how the wildlife's going to behave, and how they should behave around the wildlife. And then we're also there to monitor the birds. These penguins, as Amanda mentioned, are one of the most skittish species of penguins there are. So they are sort of caught off guard whenever they come over an area and see that there's a bunch of people working. So we're there to take notes on where they're supposed to start in the morning of that day and where they end on excavation. We're there to monitor the behavior of the birds as they come up on the work itself. And then we're supposed to monitor if it's affecting the way that they move from the colony to the sea and vice versa, the sea to the colony. When we're there during our summer in July, it's actually their winter in Peru. So the birds aren't, they're not molting. They might have chicks, but at that point they're sort of already rearing them, and the chicks are learning how to fish for themselves, things like that. The area, I thought it was really, really cool that the area that they were working on, as you can see here in this slide, sorry, Emily, I'm kind of jumping all over the place. But I figured I would do all of this from memory because it was a lot of taking in the moment and not so many pictures and things like that for my experience in particular. But what you're going to see here is on the left side of the screen, the before, and the right side of the screen is after. So these areas have actually been touched in the past by the guano excavation. And what you're seeing on the left-hand side is actually the nests for the Guanai cormorant, or the Peruvian cormorant, and it looks like moon craters. And these birds are so plentiful that they're nesting within feet of other birds. And these nests line the whole coastline. And that might look like a divot into the earth itself, but what that is actually a layer of guano that they've then divoted. So if you can look on the right-hand side of the screen, the left portion of that right-hand picture is actually the clear guano, and then you can see that definitive line there. That's actually the guano that has been untouched. So there was a picture at the beginning of the PowerPoint of my coworker standing next to some of the excavation points, and there were times where it was 3 feet deep, where you can see untouched guano and touched and sort of excavated guano. And they do pick sites for each of the years. So in 2019, they kind of went with the middle of the reserve. But the really cool thing is that I found with our data collection is that the birds aren't being impacted like you would think. If a bird comes over a hill and sees us working in the campaign, they just walk around us. They're actually doing it via pretty archaic methods. The guaneros are actually using shovels and pickaxes and burlap sacks and just packaging it up as they go. And then they take it to a really dumbed down conveyor belt filtering mechanism, and they'll take out the feathers and the bones and all that sorts of things, because these birds are using guano and any sort of feathers and bones and sticks and twigs and things like that that they can get their bills on to make nests as well. So the fertilizer is being put into the bags and then broken down on site, and then they're actually sent out via truck and even boat to get to their destination. So if you can see that bottom picture there, it's actually that's just from the 1 month or so that our teams were there watching them do the harvest. And they started to get behind schedule because the Guanai cormorant were actually moving in a little bit earlier for nesting than they had in the past. So what they did was they just started bagging everything on site and leaving it in one place and covering it up, as opposed to taking it out truckload by truckload, because at some point Suriname was going to tell them that they'd have to cut it off, and then they wouldn't be able to get back on site. So they just kind of stockpiled as much as they could and hoped that Suriname would give them a day or two notice, and then they would take it out by the truckload. So for the 2019 guano harvest in particular, we actually saw a time-lapse area of what they were supposed to get done. And as you can see, that's just a small sampling of the thousands and thousands of bags that they got. But the really cool thing I thought that happened was that they were able to get an insane amount of guano that is used for thriving as an agricultural entity country like Peru. They're sort of a poor country, and so getting their hands on this guano can actually help get awareness out about the birds, as well as produce some cash intake for the country. So they were actually able to use this space allotted to them, and they actually didn't even get to harvest the whole area because there was just so much of it. And one last final note is that the main area that the Humboldt penguins are nesting in is actually a 25-year untouched portion where the guano is probably meters deep, and the birds get to sort of thrive in that area without even having to worry about the workers coming into that area. So I believe Sydney is going to take over next.
All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the projects that I got to help with while I was down in Punta San Juan. I was actually scheduled to go for the 2018 guano harvest, which got pushed off until 2019 due to the Peruvian government. So anyways, before I went down, a couple of our FM staff were actually able to go down and work at the reserve. So they were originally going to go down to help build some blinds to protect, so that there were visual barriers between the penguins and the guano harvesters. But since that wasn't occurring until the following year, the reserve actually had quite a few projects that needed some upkeep. So as you can see in a couple of these images, there are blinds throughout the area so that they can go sit out there and observe the birds, seals, sea lions, all of that, without disturbing them. So it is a little trek to get out to where some of those blinds are at, and you have to walk very slow, but you can see, like, you can get great views from some of those. So on the top there, Tom Sainer, you can see how worn that is just from being along the coast there. Just the salt water and all of that wears the wood really quickly. So they were able to take some metal and repair that, and then they repainted it. So it was a working blind. So you can go ahead into the next slide. This was another project of theirs. So this is the back of the reserve. And there is like a kitchen area through the doors there under that overhang. So as you can see, like the bench was kind of falling apart and then it's like hanging down a lot. So they just stabilized that and made it a stronger structure, which is nice because it can get fairly hot back there. It was kind of cool when I was there. I was there in kind of the off season, more their winter time. But during busy times, they have lots of researchers there. So that's a nice place for people to gather and have a little bit of shade. And like during their lunch hour, which is their big meal of the day, instead of dinner, they all kind of congregate out there and talk. Right out back behind there too, there are like sea lions that are visible. You see penguins walking by. So it's just a really cool place to get to sit and observe and just talk amongst yourself there. So you can, and then some of the other stuff before I move on to the daily tasks, they also repaired a shed, because when you go out in the field, you have to change your clothes. You're not allowed to wear any clothes into the reserve or into the house on the reserve there that has been contaminated with guano. So there's a little shed out back, and you go in and you change into your guano clothes, and then change back into your normal clothes when you're done in the field, and then going into the house to eat or sleep or whatnot. So that shed was in dire need of repair. So they fixed the floor in it and fixed the door and everything, so that it was very important with all the people going out in the field that is working properly. They also painted some areas out at the field station and fixed some other various projects throughout the reserve. So daily tasks at the reserve. Each day we like walked around just to make sure that we didn't see any predators. So there is a fence that goes all the way along that one side of that to block the peninsula off. And that was, so they were hoping that it would block fox and other predators from getting in. However, it was pretty low tide when I was there, and there was a fox that was on the reserve. So they were monitoring where that animal was. And then they were also using live traps to try and capture it in different areas so that they can relocate it off of the reserve. While I was there, we did spot it a couple times, but we never, they didn't capture it while I was there. So. But here you can see, so the picture on the left is a view from one of those blinds, and all those little dots down there are fur seals. So then the image on the right, it's really hard to see, but a few of them have little yellow tags on their flippers. So we would spend several hours up in those blinds with binoculars trying to identify tagged individuals, and you could actually see the number on the tag. We'd record that, and then they recorded which tagged individuals they saw each day. And then they also tried to count how many animals they saw out there so they could get a good idea of how many were in that colony. And there were a couple colonies of fur seals, and I believe 2 of sea lions there. So you can go ahead and go to the next slide. So these are just a few other images. You have, let's see, up here on the left, it's more of those cormorant nests that Clinton was talking about. To the one in the middle on the top there is an image of the reserve. So in there we had a kitchen, there were restrooms, and then there were several rooms. So myself and other people visiting to help at the reserve. And then they also have a lot of like graduate students from Peru that come and do research out there as well. To the right was another view from a blind, and then you can see that little square box out on that alcove. That is another blind that you could make observations from as well. And then down in the left corner, I am near one of the 4 or 5 colonies of penguins at Punta San Juan. So at Punta San Juan, it's actually half of the Peruvian Humboldt penguins are located on the reserve. So that's why it's critical that they continually monitor these animals and that they upkeep this area so that we can ensure their survival. So, and then in the middle down at the bottom, it's just another cool landscape picture. So you can see just like, it's a giant desert. So it's pretty cool to think that penguins live there. So go ahead. So then aside from the daily tasks, we did some weekly tasks. So you can see down in the left corner, it's one of the burrows, and we were taking eggs out and they were candling them. They'd weigh them, trace the aerosol. So by candling, what I mean is you can hold the egg up to a light and you can see inside the egg to see development. And the aerosol is on that big end of the egg. And as the chick develops, the aerosol will get a little bit larger. And then when it's close to hatching, the chick will push up into that to hatch out. So over on the right, as you can see, like we're out on the top of a cliff. So there's really not a dark area that's a good place to see, you know, the development with the light. So they put a black sheet over their head and you hold it up to a flashlight to be able to see. So you have to be a little brave to sit on the side of the cliff and do that as well. I am not super keen on heights, but I did feel safe, but it took a little adjusting. So go ahead. Some more of the weekly tasks too. So I went kind of in a weird time when it wasn't like their true breeding season. It was kind of the tail end of it. So some of the birds, there are a few later incubators, I guess. So there were a few chicks that they were still doing kind of those health assessments on that Mel discussed. And then, so you can see like in the second picture, us weighing them. They also take measurements of their wings, their beaks, their feet, and just that way they can kind of document at what age the chick is and what those measurements are. So if they catch more in the wild or have them in hand, they can kind of tell what age they are if they're not sure. So, and then they also, as they got older, they would also put the toe tags on them as well. So we did that to a couple older individuals. So go ahead. And then another one of the weekly tasks was collecting fecals from the sea lions and the fur seals, and that they were just checking for parasites and sometimes too they could tell kind of what they were eating by looking at it. So as you can see on that beach, I believe there was over 4,000 sea lions out on that beach. And they honestly sounded, if anybody's ever watched Star Wars, it sounded like a bunch of Wookiees calling at night. When you would walk out there, it was a little creepy when you couldn't see them and that's all you could hear. But when we went down on the beach, they don't like to be near you. So we slowly approached to get the fecals, and you can see as they're all like pushing back or they went into the water a little bit. But luckily we weren't down there very long. I think the whole thing took maybe 20 minutes. We were back up. They all came back up on the beach, totally calm after that. And in addition to that, this image on the right, that was just a small like sampling. We would do beach cleanups while we were down there as well. So unfortunately, because you're on the coast like that too, there was lots of plastic that we saw and other like fishing nets, fishing gear, all sorts of stuff. So it's really important to recycle and make sure that we're not polluting the oceans as well, because that directly affects those sea lions, the penguins, all of that. I mean, we saw a couple animals that had some stuff stuck on them. And they do their best too to get those items removed from them if they see that. So go ahead. And then in addition, so when I was there, there were a lot of grad students and they were doing a lot of different research projects. So on the left, we were kind of monitoring one of the colonies of penguins in a little tiny blind. And we had turkey vultures that kept coming out and pulling on the blind while we were in there, which was kind of interesting to see as well. But they were just doing behavior studies of them. And then also there was a BBC photographer there and he was out in those blinds getting some good images for some documentaries. So, and then in the middle there, you can see the turkey vultures on one of the blinds we were on. And then to the left, there's Daniel, one of the researchers. They were doing a whole bunch of studies on invertebrates found around there. So they had like sea urchins and some other animals I wasn't familiar with, but they were taking all sorts of samples from them as well. So we helped over on the right, you can see all the little tubes. We helped organize those and label them. We were just kind of assistants in their lab for at least a week that I was there. We were doing stuff like that. So go ahead. And then also I was there, so you can see down in the corner, that's one of the Andean fox that we saw. Then we have a Peruvian diving petrel, and then there's also a ring storm petrel. So these birds, unfortunately, since they're right near the coast there, Marcona is not far from the coast. That's the closest town. So it has a lot of light, and at night when these guys are flying around, they sometimes get disoriented from all the light in the city. So they kind of veered off course, and they ended up, people found them in their yards. So they brought them out to the reserve, and luckily these two were in pretty good shape. So we were able just to give them some fluids. We kept them calm during the day, and then we were able to release them back out into the wild at night. But just another thing to remind everybody, keeping your lights off at night is a good thing too for migrating birds. So, and then that was it. So just a great sunset and image of the Humboldts that we saw. So. I think you're muted.
On mute. So it looks like some of our panelists have been hard at work answering some of your questions in the Q&A. A lot of you had similar questions that I'm going to ask them now. So blah. Mel, where did your STL Zoo beer go?
It's halfway gone.
You don't have your little penguin? Your penguin can? You kill him.
Empty.
Yay! There it is. Okay. So,
silly question.
So since it is a happy hour, Mel has one of our, the Urban Chestnut has an awesome beer that if you get it, you're supporting them as a local business and supporting the St. Louis Zoo. For those of you that cannot drink beer like me, you could always make yourself a Pisco Sour, which is the national beverage of Peru. But I have a couple questions for you guys just about your trip and about some things that maybe people have never thought of when it comes to field work. So the first one you guys kind of touched on, but how did you feel and how did it work when you were in a country where you do not speak the language? I love that all of you are kind of like
Well, many people speak English, and you know, you try and learn a little Spanish before you leave, but you're just surrounded by a bunch of Spanish speakers and they can throw in words here and there. It's funny though, because you just know what everybody's thinking. I do kind of have a funny story, if I may.
Yes.
When it comes to language and language barriers. So when we're climbing around with all our gear, you just kind of find a level spot to put everything for accessibility. And unfortunately, one of the times we laid it in shade. Nobody thought anything about it. It just happened to be in shade where the sand fleas like to congregate. So you're sitting on a rock, maybe holding a penguin or moving the stuff around, and they just kind of start crawling up you. Yeah. And so Franco, one of the students, totally lost it. He thought, I don't know what he thought. So he went running over. He's taking his sweater off. First his jacket, his sweater, and so I just kind of tiptoed a little bit behind him and just did a little, what are you doing? And totally lost it. And so you don't need to speak Spanish to scare somebody.
Universal.
Yeah, laughter works in any language.
So another question I had that you will all be able to speak to experience, I'm sure. And some of you did touch on it. So most of you work with Humboldt penguins almost every day at this point. what is it like working with Humboldt penguins every day at the zoo and then seeing or interacting with wild Humboldt penguins? What are some of the differences?
I was going to say, in my experience there, so it was just very humbling to get to see them in the wild. I mean, an amazing experience. Anybody that gets the opportunity, I hope everybody would get the opportunity to do that. So, but they are a lot different than our ones in captivity. So they are way more skittish. You have to move very slow. Don't make loud noises. Like we would crouch down and just stop, let them walk by. And then they do have some similarities though. As far as like putting things in their nest, we would find some of the trash that they would find in the ocean, they would put in their nest, or feathers. It was just interesting. There were some similarities as well. So, but yeah, overall just, and when we would also go to take them out of the nest or remove eggs, they're not as defensive as our birds are in captivity, probably because they're not as used to seeing people up close like our birds are. So, so that maybe isn't the greatest thing, but that it was nice to see that there were differences and similarities. So.
All right, next question. And Amanda's gonna laugh at me. Inca Cola, love it or hate it. It's the golden cola. You can only find it in Peru. It's very polarizing.
Yeah, I'd say
bubblegum and magic.
yeah, you have to try it once. It's like, it's, your brain tells you it's going to taste like Mountain Dew or Surge or something like that, but it doesn't taste like that at all. It's like cream soda or something. I like it. I usually have like one per trip, but.
I disagree. It tastes like bubble gum really bad.
I didn't drink soda. I only drink beer.
Oh, Mel. Sutton, have you had an Inca Cola?
I did try it. I'm not a soda drinker, but I had to try, you know, when in Peru. I thought it was good, but same with Mel. Uno más cerveza, por favor. And fake it till you make it, you know, so.
So I had a couple of questions from one of our guests, Katie, who sent them ahead of time, which was appreciated. So what is like the most, like, have you had a scary or like tension-filled situation while you're doing conservation work in Peru? Like anything that was like, I think Sydney talked about the heights, but other things that you have thought of?
I have an instance. So, you know, muy poquito español. You know, I speak very little Spanish, and that government agency, this Suriname, at one point, you know, yes, our bosses are in the center for Punta San Juan, but Suriname is overseeing them. And I was sitting in an area where Marco, the instructor, had told me to sit. And the Guano cormorant had started moving in a little bit earlier than what was to be expected for nesting. So here I am, you know, sun rises and I hadn't been able to see anything. And then I look around me and I'm surrounded by Guano cormorant, and the Suriname individual is waving at me, but I didn't know he was of importance. So I was like, all right, this guy, I'm just gonna let him do his thing. And he had to come and get me. And then he had his phone translated with Google, and it said like, I am of the government. Please let these birds do what they're going to do and come down here. And it was, I thought I was going to get in major trouble. It was just a misunderstanding, and everybody was okay with it. But yeah, it's you know, even when you're trying to mind your P's and Q's, they're very, very serious down there. So I thought that was kind of funny.
Well, the advent of the Google Translate and having service in Peru helps with the language barrier tremendously.
Yeah.
Everybody's got it on their phone and you just type it in and that helps. Oh, here's a good question. Jim wants to know, where did everyone stay while you were there? How long of a trip was it, or trips for some of you? And like from the town to the reserve, like how far away is Marcona? Was it camping? You know, how do you do it?
So for this,
Okay.
Oh, go ahead, Mel, go ahead.
Is it my turn? No. Well, I went from St. Louis to Atlanta, and then Atlanta to Lima. Then, like I said, the drive from Lima down to Marcona was about 7 hours. So it took a day, or it was a long time, a day basically, just to get there. The town of Marcona, which is the closest town to Punta San Juan, I don't know, maybe it's close. It's like a half an hour in drive in the truck. And so all in all, there was, you know, once you got to the Punta San Juan and the reserve, and when you're staying, it used to be a dorm for guaneros, people that would, I mean, this was a long time ago, the former one. I'm getting my stories mixed up. I saw the, come on, it was 10 years ago, Amanda, quit laughing. They had built this and just cinder block, and it was just very remedial. There was no electricity, just little room after room. We didn't have running water or anything. We got a generator for about an hour a day, and we had little candles in the hallway. And so it was very rudimentary, but I mean, it was fabulous. I had this little cot thing, I guess, and I could hear the ocean outside my window. So I didn't have electricity, you know, and I didn't have running water. I got to hear the beach in the morning. So that was my experience with it.
And I think the reserve, when I was there in 2015, is fairly similar with no running water, no electricity, except for when they run the generator.
Yeah, so for the census, we stay at the reserve usually one night, but for the rest of the trip, we're kind of traveling, we're kind of hopscotching down the coast, so we're not staying in one place for more than a couple of nights. And most of the times we're staying in like small hotels, nothing like as standardized as like a Holiday Inn, but you know, like small hotels, perfectly fine little places to stay.
All right, so Sydney, did you?
Oh no, I was gonna say mine was similar to Mel's. I stayed at the reserve and it was like bunk beds, but there was some running water, but the showers were very, very cold. So some of us went into the G house, the other house, and there was a little bit warmer water there, but you wanted to get the shower before everybody else to get warm water. So, and the trip, I think the flight, I flew from Newark, New Jersey to Lima, and then, so that was like a 7.5 hour flight. And then it was about an 8-hour bus ride down from Lima to Marcona. So.
And my trip was very similar to everyone else's. But then I was on the reserve for 12 days, and then I went back to Lima, then to Cusco, then to Machu Picchu. So I had a bit of a bonus, but that was on my own time.
So we have time for one last question that I already had planned. And Katie, it's a question from Katie again. What was the most rewarding moment while conducting conservation research on the ground in Peru? So if you can all come up with your kind of final, what was the most rewarding, and then we will sign off.
I'll share mine first. So at one of the sites, we did actually get off of the boat to use the restroom of the Guano guard that was there on the island. And I like, this is the first time I'd stepped foot on any of the islands. And so that itself was kind of amazing. I mean, the guard is pretty much the only person that should be there at any time. And probably one of the most remote places in the entire world. So that itself was very moving, and just seeing all of the colonies of Burrs just like circling around you as you're standing on this little tiny piece of land out in the middle of the ocean was incredible. But as I was walking to the little outhouse, there are Inca terns just like draped over the side of this cliff. And Emily knows, they're like my favorite. I love Inca terns. And I saw like a freshly fledged juvenile, like begging to its mom its parent, and it was feeding. And I don't know, that was just really memorable and really cool.
I guess I could share mine. I had never left the country before. So here I am at the reserve. You know, we had been traveling for a whole day, and the sun's coming up, and there's all these, all the wildlife, the penguins, the fur seals, the sea lions, all that stuff's coming to light. And so if you've smelled penguin and puffin coast, it often smells like a marina, right? It smells like fish. But if you really get the smells going during nesting season, you can smell the guano coming from the Humboldt penguin nest boxes. And we're wearing these masks in these crazy times, and it's soaking up that smell. And so here I am looking at this map, barely awake, and I can see where we are. And I'm halfway to Antarctica, out of a country I've never been out of and into. And I just get this big whiff of guano and all these really nice people around me and wildlife and stuff. And I just took a big breath, and I just kind of said home out loud. Like, it was so familiar to me. And I know this sounds kind of weird, but now that we're wearing the masks, I can get the whiff of guano every now and then in my mask. And I love it. Like, I absolutely love it. Like, it brings me back to being in Peru and all the cool memories I've had with chicks and Humboldt penguins in particular. So it was surreal. It was, and I can't wait to go back. So.
Am I going next then, Sid? You know, like, just the whole immersion aspect of it, like Clinton was saying, where it's just everything around you, everything you see and smell and hear. But just being able to be there and do this conservation work through the zoo and for the penguins was amazing. But I remember standing, oh, see, guys, I'm gonna cry. So I'm standing on the coast and just looking out and just taking it all in. And Marco, who's, you know, the guy, he comes next to me, and I think I was probably holding my camera, as, you know, you're out in this vista, of course, as you have a camera, but I was just, and I think, you want me to take your picture? No, we're just going to stand here and look at it and just, you know, listen to it and enjoy it. And we could take a million pictures and it just wouldn't do it justice. And so it really was, you know, the zoo to let me do that, and just to, you know, I've traveled a bit, and that's an amazing experience. So there you go.
So I think it's hard to pick like just one thing. I mean, it is just an amazing experience getting to see like so much life in such a like dry area too. Like, you wouldn't think you'd see that much there. But I'd say one of my top ones there was, it actually rained for about a minute when I was there, and there was a rainbow we could see from one of the blinds, which was just amazing to see. But all the turkey vultures, there were like 100 turkey vultures just circling around in the rain. The researcher that I was out there with, she like just stood out in the rain, had her hands up looking up. So it was just really cool to get to see, like, she doesn't get to see rain that much because she's from that area. So it was just neat to see that through her eyes and just see how the animals reacted to it. There was Inca terns right to the right. They were all calling. I mean, it was just a really cool experience. So one that I am very grateful that I got to travel for the St. Louis Zoo as well. And that was only the second time I'd been out of the country as well by myself. So that in itself too, you're just like so proud of yourself. Like, yes, I did this by myself. I got here, you know, with the zoo's help, obviously, and just very proud to represent the zoo there and get to participate in that field work. So.
Awesome. This has been amazing. I'll throw mine in there super quick. We're already over time, but I can't help myself. There are so many, but there was a point where Amanda and I were on a boat going out to the Isla Ballestas to see the animals. We had been in an office building for a week. We were outside. We were gonna go finally see nature, and all of the birds were leaving the island to go get food. and they were just like swarming all around this boat. And it kind of reminded me of the end of Jurassic Park when the pelicans, and it just made me think, you know, you think about all this conservation work and it can be so daunting thinking about all these massive tasks of conservation, and just seeing that made me feel like the end of Jurassic Park, where it's like, it can be okay. It's gonna be okay. There they go. They don't care. The sun is rising. The birds are going. It's gonna be okay. It's just incredible. So, thank you so much, panelists. This was amazing. I know we went over because we had so many stories to tell. But for those of you that are with us, we will have 3 more of these happy hours. We have Madagascar, American Bearing Beetle, and Chelonian coming up for you. So check out our website and those registration links will be up. This has been recorded. It will also be up later if you want to check it out. If you want to learn more, make sure to go to stlzoo.org/conservation, and we will see you all later. Have a great evening. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.